you be better prepared for for getting in front of the recruiters and eventually being able to get a job, an interview, or an internship. And we'll talk a little bit about specifics on getting on the radar and building relationships with recruiters that ultimately will help you to obtain the job that you're looking for. I'll discuss briefly some different types of internships that you should be aware of. Then we'll look at transitioning from school to industry. And finally, we'll look at different types of careers and different types of career paths. And I've actually included a couple of job postings that I pulled off of the internet yesterday that we can review and have a little bit of discussion about. So a little bit about who I am. Again, my name is Harold Bryant. I have a PhD in analytical chemistry that I got from University of Pittsburgh. I first attended Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, where I obtained my Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry. From there, I went to Indiana University, but not the Indiana University that's hosting the webinar, but Indiana University of Pennsylvania. And I did a Master's of Arts there. The main reason that I went through the interim step of getting a Master's of Arts degree, the truth is that I was unsure about my ability to get a PhD. So I took the interim step to actually build my confidence to be able to go to the PhD program level. After the Master's, I went to University of Pittsburgh, where I attained my PhD in analytical chemistry. During my time in going to school, both between my master's and PhD program, I only had one internship, and it was at Alcoa Technical Center. I worked there for 3 summers, so I guess technically it was 3 internships, but it was at the same company. And it was there where I really began to understand what a career in industry would be like. When I got out of school at University of Pittsburgh, my first position was at Baxter Healthcare Corporation, which is a pharmaceutical company. I worked in their IV drug development section, and I was in the stability laboratory. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides. I then left Baxter Healthcare, and I went to a personal care company, a small personal care company in the Chicago area called Helene Curtis. Some of the big products they made were all of the Suave products and Degree deodorant. There were a bunch of other products, but those are probably the 2 most well-known products. And at that company, what I did is I did chromatography. I did analytical chemistry on personal care products and formulations. That company was subsequently purchased by Unilever, that makes Dove. They also have a big foods division that makes, I can't believe it's not butter, Hellman mayonnaise, Breyer's ice cream. So there's a ton of products that Unilever makes. But as they purchased Helene Curtis, I was in the division that was responsible for developing hair care products and deodorant. So again, Degree deodorant, Suave deodorant, the Dove hair care products. All of those types of products is what we worked on in Chicago. Once again, with my background in analytical chemistry, my main role was in the analytical chemistry area, a group that they called measurement science, and our responsibility was really to understand the raw materials and the formulations for the personal care products related to both hair and deodorants. I then left Unilever and ended up where I currently am, and that's with L'Oreal, which is the #1 beauty company in the world. And again, you can see I'm still in the same industry, but I have now worked for 3 different companies in the same industry. Within L'Oreal, I've had the opportunity to work on an advanced research team, so something that was not specifically related to my degree that I did in school, but it was working on hair and skin and getting a better understanding of the differences of hair and skin for people of different ethnicities and people from different geographies, local geographies around the world, to determine whether or not specific products would be necessary to treat their consumer needs. So that's kind of my background in terms of how I got to where I am. My actual job title right now is Vice President of Research and Innovation, and I am in charge of 3 teams here at L'Oreal, one of them being analytical chemistry, obviously directly related to my background. The second team is microbiology, and the third team is what L'Oreal calls demi-grand, which the direct translation from French is half big. Basically, it's a pilot plant, so there are a bunch of engineers that work on scaling products up that the formulators make on the bench, and to bring them up to a scale slightly smaller than what they would make in production in the plant, but making sure that the formula and the process in making the formula and putting it together is something that could be done inside one of our plants. So now let's talk briefly about the goals of corporate recruiting. This is a slide that I took directly from our talent recruitment team that they share when they go to the universities and they give different presentations to different groups. And really what their goals are to attract the top talent, to build a talent pipeline within L'Oreal, obviously to be able to make sure that we have the best talent for the future moving forward. Just a few years ago, maybe about 5 years ago now, they centralized the recruiting operation as opposed to each division doing recruiting on their own. And one of the reasons they did that is to be able to have a consistent message and collective effort. So now when L'Oreal does recruiting, when they come to a campus or they come to a career fair or a trade show, they come with multiple people from multiple disciplines to be able to tap into top talent across either the university or across the career fair or at the trade show, to showcase all of the different opportunities that are available for people to work at L'Oreal. And ultimately, at the end of the day, L'Oreal would like to be the company to work for. So not only do we want to spend the time and effort in recruiting, but we also want people to want to work here for L'Oreal. And once they start working here, we want them to stay. So it's important to understand a little bit of the background details about recruiting. So some of the things that the recruitment team considers a success for campus recruitment is that they go to key schools based on academic strength, based on what they feel the cultural fit of the students are for the culture within L'Oreal, and also based on strong relationships. So historically, what happens over time is that the success of the talent recruitment team in getting students, either from universities or specific conferences, gives them the confidence that if they continue to go back there, that they will continue to get good students. And I'll explain why this is important in just the next slide. They also consider to be clearly successful if they have identified student targets for each function. And again, this goes back to them being able to fill the talent pipeline. So what I mean by that is if they know that one school has a good engineering program, but they also have a good business program, and they have a good chemistry program, those are the schools or the conferences or the trade shows that are attractive to them because they know that they can have a pool of diverse candidates to fill different openings within the company. They like to build close partnerships with professors and student organizations. And again, that's so that they create a buzz on the campus of students and professors talking about the opportunities that are available at L'Oreal. But it's also because they get a really good feeling for the professors and the students during this recruitment process. They consider it to be successful if they can have a coordinated effort as a campus team. So again, not individual departments going to the university, but a team of recruiters going to represent all of the different areas within L'Oreal. And then they want to make sure that there's a consistent assessment from campus visits. And the taste events and assessment centers, those are very specific to the way L'Oreal does. And basically what that is after they do campus visits at 2 points during the year, they take a collection of the students that they visited or that have come to the career events, and they invite them to L'Oreal to spend a couple of days where they go through some kind of intense interviews so we can get a feel on how good the selection of students is based on what our criteria are. So again, this is very important here, which you'll see here, the same slide, but with some things highlighted in red. So what are the things that you can focus on to make sure that you're in this mix of talent recruitment? You obviously, depending on the academic strength of your school, will play a role in how often recruiters come or how well the recruitment is going in terms of career fairs that may be offered at your school. But the one thing you can work on is helping to build strong relationships. If you see on the third bullet point, partnerships with professors and student organizations, what your role can be in this is that making sure that you're involved in these student organizations, making sure that if you see a note or an email or something posted on campus saying that some company or a number of companies will be coming to the chemistry department to give a presentation, even if you're not in the chemistry department, it may be worth your time to stop by and sit in on the presentation, because that may prevent you with the opportunity, one, to learn more about the company, but two, to be able to get in front of the person or people who happen to be there representing the company, so you can talk to them, share some of your questions with them, but you can also begin to let them get to know you. So the role that you play in this is trying to help build that relationship with the recruiters, either through departments, professors, or student organizations. And what you want to end up doing is being one of the students that's targeted for either an internship or ultimately to be hired. So what are all of the different student touch points? And again, these are the areas where you can play a major role in making sure that you make yourself visible, making sure that you're getting the information that you need, and also making sure that you're interacting with recruiters that happen to be on campus or at career fairs. And this is a list of things that I know that other companies do. Some of these L'Oreal does, some of them we don't, but I know that most companies go to career fairs. They go to diversity conferences. They have information sessions either at the conferences or directly at the universities. They also promote networking events where they may sponsor an evening event or a lunchtime event. They do coffee chats where they set something up in the cafeteria and people can come by and talk to them about the company, what positions are available, what it's like to work there. We do employee panels where various universities will ask us to send a scientist. These are typically interesting when we send alumni back to the schools that they previously attended to speak with students so they can have a very direct conversation about what it's like to work at a specific company, what type of skill sets are necessary. We do classroom sessions where we, as I mentioned earlier, will contact a professor and say, hey, we'd like to give a presentation about the science of hair care at one of your chemistry departments or something like that. And obviously, we also do on-campus interviews. So these are all of the things that you have to keep your eyes and ears open for and make sure that you try as much as you can to attend some of these. Obviously, you don't want to spend all of your time running around to these things, but if there's a company that you're interested in, or if you know somebody who works at a specific company that now sounds interesting to you, that you look out for these things and you try to make yourself available for those. So that basically covers the aspect of recruiting, so you can kind of understand the different ways that companies recruit students and recruit talent these days, mainly so you make sure that you make yourself available. I can't tell you how many times I went to give a presentation at one of these, say, classroom sessions or networking events, only to find out that there was low turnout. And one situation in particular I went to, and the ratio to girls to guys was probably, I don't know, maybe 8-1. And so we asked the professor afterwards why there weren't any guys there, and he basically said that the guys felt that the beauty industry was mainly for women, so they didn't attend the event. But I can assure you that they missed out on some opportunities. I see we've got one raised hand. So if you can type your question. I'm going to keep going because I don't see the question in the chat box, but I did see the raised hand. So the other thing you should understand about internships, or when you finally get the position you're looking for, it's very important that you know the industry and the company. So it's not just us looking to recruit talent. It's not just companies trying to fill their talent pipeline, but you should also know as much as you can about the company. And also know yourself. You need to understand the things that you may like, what you won't like. You want to remain open, but I'm sure there's certain things that you already know, or that you will know by the time you graduate from school, that you're pretty sure that if I had to do this, I'm not going to like it, or I'm not going to like it very much. So keep those things in mind as you yourself are looking for what's the best fit for you. You need to understand what the company is looking for. You need to understand what traits define success. Now, a lot of times, you won't get this information from a single source. So if you go to a career fair and you're talking to somebody from human resources or from talent recruitment, it's also a very good idea to try to talk to somebody who's actually in the lab doing some science. And they can give you a better feel for what the transition was, what has made them successful, what has made their boss successful. Those types of things are very important for you to begin to understand as you make your decision about where you want to go. So again, keep in mind that it's not just what the company wants, but also what you want. You should take the time to learn about various industries. In this industry, personal care or beauty care is a very perfect example. When I first went on my first interview for this industry, my idea was that all they make is shampoo, which basically is soap and water, so how difficult can that be? So I really went on the original interview with the thinking that I was going to practice my interview skills, but I really wasn't interested in the job. However, when I left that first interview, after having talked to several scientists and had taken a tour of the labs to see all of the science that really goes behind making these products, I was quite impressed. And I've been in this industry now for 21 years, so apparently I like it. So again, make sure that you explore different industries before you make up your mind. And again, I'll say, I can't say this enough, attend department-specific industry events. Regardless of what the industry is, if they're taking the time to come talk to your students at your school, try to make sure that you can attend those events and get some very specific information. And I think everybody knows that internships are key, and we'll speak about that in just a few minutes. But if you can get into an internship program, it is very important. And even though I only internshipped at one company, and as I mentioned, I did an internship 3 years with them, it was critical in me making a decision that I wanted to go into industry and not to stay into academia, because I saw how much fun it was to work in industry, how challenging it was from a scientific standpoint, and that kind of mix of the two, I think, was very, very appealing to me. The other thing you want to keep in mind, particularly going back to the first bullet point about knowing the industry, know the company, and most importantly, know yourself, is that if you end up in a situation where there's not a good match between what you want to do and what the company's asking you to do, ultimately that's a bad fit. And a bad fit equals an unsuccessful opportunity. So it's time that you could have been spent at someplace else doing what you really like to do. And at the end of the day, it's an unsuccessful opportunity. And what I mean by that is that irrespective of how that opportunity ends or how unsuccessful it is, at the end of the day, it's going to be looked at as an unsuccessful opportunity, both for you, but also for the company that spent the time recruiting and hiring and training. So at the end of the day, you've got two parties who now look at that situation as an unsuccessful opportunity. And what happens, particularly going back to recruiting, if a company has several unsuccessful opportunities related to a specific career fair or related to a specific university or a specific department, it now decreases the likelihood that they will continue to recruit from those pools of people if they think that there is a relationship between the success and the area that they're doing the recruiting from. So keep that in mind. All right, so now the different types of internships, and I came up with these names myself. So this, you won't find this anywhere, I don't think, in terms of the description. So it's more about the description and not the titles that I gave these internships. So for me, there are really two types of internships. One is the one that I call mentoring, which is basically used to introduce young students to career options. And those usually occur early in a student's academic career. So sometimes when they're in their, second, third year of undergraduate school, there may not be any specific openings at the company, so there's no promise that you'll be hired. And it may or may not track to graduation. So what I mean by that is oftentimes these mentoring internships are used really just to help prepare students for their future. So we may not track whether or not you get to graduation. We may not have a position for you when you get hired, even if you're an excellent student. The idea behind these types of internships is really to help prepare you for your future. And that was the type of internship that I was in when I was at Alcoa many, many, many years ago. The type of internship specifically that a lot of companies are switching to, in particular L'Oreal, who I work for now, is what I call an auditioning internship. So what we look for are top students, and we let them work on real challenging projects. So these are projects that, these aren't busy work projects where this is something that our chemists don't have time to do, so we'll bring some summer interns in to get the work done. These are real projects with real outcomes, and they're challenging projects. So in order to be able to do that, we have to make sure that we select students whose profiles match current job openings. And the idea is to introduce students to the entire corporation. And this gets back to something I said a little bit earlier, is allowing the students to look at the company while the company looks at the students. Because at the end of the day, as I mentioned, the missed opportunity that comes in a bad fit is not a good situation for either party. So we allow the students to evaluate the fit as we're evaluating the students. And oftentimes, these types of internships are offered near the end of your education, either at the undergraduate level or at the master's level. Depending on where you are, we want to make sure that it's close enough to the end that we can make you a job offer if we would like to. So the difference is that there are specific job openings, and sometimes jobs can be offered at the end of the internship, on or near the last day of the internship. If they've identified what they feel are very top talents, they will make them offers on the spot or very close to when they leave. And so it's important for you to understand the difference in these types of internships, because it's very, very important, if it's an auditioning internship, that you stay on your toes and that you really do the work of evaluating the company, because at the end of that internship, you may in fact get an offer, and you may need to make a decision on whether or not you want to work for that company. So you spend the time during the internship obviously focusing on the project and making sure you do a good job on the project, but also learning as much as you can about the company. So let's talk a little bit about transitioning to industry. And this is really going to be industry dependent. And it's really important, again, that you understand the differences between the different industries. And I'll give you kind of two examples from my experience. When I first got out of school, I went to work for Baxter Healthcare, as I mentioned, which is a pharmaceutical company. And the transition there from doing PhD research to doing research for a pharmaceutical company, that change is not as drastic as the one if you go from a PhD program, say, to an industry that is less research focused or that is not doing advanced research. And so let me explain a little bit. So the difference between the pharmaceutical industry is that they're doing really cutting edge research, looking for new molecules, new drugs, new interactions, new ways to diagnose diseases. And for instance, in this industry here, while we still do a lot of science, it's not to the same level. We're not doing research projects that take 7 or 8 years to come to fruition. We're looking to do research that comes to fruition within 2 to 5 years. And depending on which department, if you work in the formula development department, they're working on projects that last for maybe 6 to 9 months. So again, moving from a PhD program to an industry where it's not as intensely focused on research is something you need to consider as you begin to make that transition. The other thing you want to consider is work-life balance. And what I say there is that what I coach people is that you have to, before you begin to balance your work and your life, you have to work. So a lot of people, and let me explain that. So when you get out of school, the idea is that you want to have this perfect balance between, oh, I'm going to go to work and I'm going to work from 9 to 5 or 8 to 4. And every day I'm going to leave at 4 o'clock because I have to get to the gym or I have to get to volleyball practice or whatever it is that you plan to do after work. But you have to understand that there are times when, particularly as you go up the ladder, which we'll talk about again in a little bit, that you'll have to work more, and so that balance may not always be there. So I think you have to be open-minded and understand that it's not always going to be a perfect balance, and particularly when you're doing science and research. And I'm sure if you're particularly in a PhD program that you would understand that experiments don't always go from 9 to 5. So you have to be open to understanding that and not come in with the idea that, every day I'm going to leave at 4 o'clock. The next point I wanted to talk about is the transition, whether you're transitioning from a PhD program or a bachelor's program. And again, that has to do with the level of research and the level of science and the level of time that you put into doing your work and how comfortable you are in making that transition. Because for most industries, the transition from a PhD program into industry, with the exception of a few high-tech industries, you may find or you may feel that there's a drop-off in the level of science. And for some people, that's not a comfortable feeling. And again, this gets back to the point of knowing yourself and knowing the industry. The other important point about PhD versus bachelor science is that some companies bring PhDs into the workforce, and there will always be a mixture of PhDs, bachelors, and masters. And for some companies, what they tend to do is bring PhDs and put them in charge immediately after getting out of school. One of the things that creates in some instances is that you've got people with BS degrees who've been at that company for 4 or 5 years, and here you come in from school, you have really not a clear idea of the specifics of what they're working on, but now all of a sudden you're in charge. So sometimes what happens is that the people who have been there longer than you will now begin to question, well, I know more than this person, so how can this person be in charge? And I'm only saying that so that you are cognizant of the fact that when you get to a company, whether you have a PhD degree and the other person has a bachelor's or a master's, that you have to respect the fact that people who have been working there have something to bring to the table. They have some knowledge. And I've seen in the past where some PhDs come in and they feel that the people who don't have PhDs are their technicians, and they kind of tell them what to do, when to do it, and that doesn't always work well for the situation in terms of your transition to the company, and sometimes it creates a backlash against the PhDs. And I say that only so that you keep that in mind. And normally when I coach PhDs is that I think what we bring to the table that's a little bit different is the fact that we have developed a special skill set in being able to solve problems. We know how to gather information. We know how to design experiments. We know how to probably get to the answer a little quicker just because our training. That necessarily doesn't mean that we know more about the specific industry. So just keep that in mind. And one of the other things that's clearly different between academia and industry, or your PhD graduate program and industry, is that when you're solving a problem in academia or in your PhD program, you have an unlimited amount of time. You have to get the absolute best answer you can. You use the best equipment, even if you have to build it yourself. But in industry, you have to get the best answer you can with whatever you have to work with in the time that they give you. So there is a disconnect in those two things. And initially, particularly for most PhD, that feels uncomfortable because you always feel that if I had one more day, or if I had a more sensitive mass spectrometer, or you know, if I had some more information, or if I could do a literature search, that I would be able to come up with a better answer. So that you have to be aware of that also, that there will be that internal conflict, at least initially, as you transition into industry. So let's talk just a little bit about my own career path. The different titles are listed on the left, and then I'll talk a little bit about what some of the responsibilities were associated with those titles. So when I first got out of school, I was at Baxter Healthcare. My first title was Senior Lab Supervisor. So I had a group of, and this is one of those situations where I had a PhD and they put me in charge of a group, and I really didn't have a clear idea of what they were doing, but I found myself in charge. So I had a group of approximately, I think it was 10 or 11 people working under me. And the biggest aha for me was, that I was responsible for not just doing some of my own work, but sort of overseeing, scheduling, I don't know what you want to call it, but also ultimately responsible for the output, as in reviewing the data, making sure that people did the math right, making sure the experiments were run right, making sure that the laboratory notebooks were entered correctly. So there was a whole nother level of responsibility associated with the work that I had not anticipated, and that truthfully in the beginning that I struggled with, because I had always been responsible for making sure my own work was okay, but now having to do the same thing for a group of other people was a little different for me. When I left Baxter, I went again, like I mentioned, to Helene Curtis. My first title there was technical specialist. So this was a technical role. So I no longer had people reporting to me. I was responsible for developing new methods and things of that nature. So this was what we call in the industry an individual contributor role. My next title was senior scientist. So this is again with no people reporting to me, but just the responsibility again of moving methods forward, developing new methods, finding ways to answer different types of questions. So again, more of a technical role. And we'll talk about the different career paths in just a minute. My next title was group leader. So this is where I got back into sort of managing people. And in this case, it was a more comfortable fit for me now because I had done a significant amount of work on the bench to better understand the work of the people that now would be reporting to me. So this was, I think, as I look back, this was a better fit for me because I had a little more confidence, or probably a lot more confidence than I did when I first got out of school. So what happens as you sort of go up this ladder, or you change these titles as I do, basically you either get greater technical independence, you either work with larger projects, or you have larger groups of people reporting to you. Currently, I'm responsible on the 3 teams that I'm responsible for. I've got about 60 people. So I'm happy that I don't have to check all of their work every day, otherwise I'd go crazy. But so basically this is what happens as you progress in your career. You can stay, and we'll go through in the next slide, so I'll save it for that. But my next title was manager, then I was director, then assistant vice president, and now my title is vice president of research and innovation. So just a quick note, and I think we talked briefly about this. The difference between working in the pharmaceutical industry and the cosmetics or personal care industry is that in the pharmaceutical industry, you have a great feeling of doing good. You feel that you're working to treat sickness, to help people who have ailments, to improve their quality of life. And the projects are much longer term. You could work on the same project for 5, 6, 7 years. In pharmaceuticals. In the industry I'm in now, personal care or cosmetics, it's a much faster pace, shorter product cycles. Even if you come up with a product next year, within 2 or 3 years, either that product's being revised or it's no longer on the shelf because it's been replaced with something else. And there are new challenges all the time. And this is very important to understand. And again, gets back to knowing the industry and knowing yourself. We have hired people from the pharmaceutical industry in the past who left running and screaming because the pace of the work and the fact that you come to work and next week you're working on something different than you were the week before didn't feel good to them because they had developed the career habits of working on projects for a longer period of time and maybe working on 1 or 2 projects. We're here, you're working on 5 or 6 projects at the same time. So again, it's important to know the industry and to know yourself. So here's an example of what a lot of industries have, which they call their dual career path ladder. So basically, one side is technical skills. The other side is some combination of technical and people skills. At the very bottom of the ladder are sort of the entry-level positions, depending whether you come in the industry with a bachelor's or if you come in with a PhD or a master's, depending on years of experience and what your educational background is. You'll typically start off at one of these levels, and this could be called biologist or engineer or whatever your discipline is. They can use this kind of general terminology, whether it's chemist or biologist, microscopist, or whatever it is that you specialize in. You'll generally come in this area here where you're on the bench, you're really learning about the company, you're learning about the project, you're learning about what it takes to succeed. You then start to move up, and at some point, each company has sort of a split in their career path where you continue to move up on the technical side. So associate principal scientist, senior principal scientist, and basically what these steps in your career represent is that you are developing very specific technical expertise that is recognized not just within your team, not just within the division, not within the company, but even outside of the company where you're writing papers, you're giving talks, and people within the industry in general begin to see you as an expert. On the other side of the ladder is as you're going up, you obviously need to have some level of technical skills. But as you start to get up in the director and the AVP and the VP range, you're more focused on the strategy of the organization. How can I help my team best serve the overall organization? What do I need to do to make sure I have talent lined up if somebody leaves that it's not going to hurt us? What can I do to make sure that we have the right technical people working on the bench or giving presentations and writing papers to represent us the best way? So you're more involved in the strategy, but you have to have a strong technical foundation because obviously if you're working in a scientific area, part of the strategy obviously is what you can do to move the science forward. What can you do to get answers faster? How can you do more projects with the same people or with the same resources? So you do have to have a strong technical background. And most companies allow you to move back and forth between the technical ladder and the scientific ladder. The thing is, as you get further and further up the technical ladder, the interest in moving over to do more strategic stuff is probably less and less in terms of your own personal desires. So this is just a general example of how you can move up in your career once you get started. And keep in mind that even though this is not drawn to scale, so the amount of time it takes you to go from chemist to senior chemist is much shorter than it would take for you to go from principal scientist to senior principal scientist. So each one of these steps in your career, there will probably be a longer period of time between when you go from one level to the next level. So let's talk a little bit about progressing on the technical track. So this is done mainly in two ways, and I talked briefly about it, but you can develop a technical expertise over time. So let's take a look at, say, mass spectrometry. You can become the expert in mass spectrometry in your industry. So if you become the mass spec expert in the personal care industry, so recognized internally and externally, or you can develop a technical breadth that allows you to contribute at a very high level, or manage large multidisciplinary projects. So again, maybe you're an expert in mass spec and you're an expert in chromatography, but at the end of the day, what your expertise is that you have the ability to analyzed formulations in the cosmetic industry. You have this knack, you have the technical expertise, but you have the ability to very quickly answer questions people may have about formulations. So that's not a specific technical expertise. It's built on a technical expertise, but you now have a broader understanding of something bigger. So the formulations in personal care industry. And as you continue to build upon that, as I mentioned before, you become recognized internally and externally. That's how you progress on the technical track. On the management track, you have increasing responsibilities, starting out from the day-to-day, like I mentioned when I was senior lab supervisor, making sure that everybody's calculations were correct and their notebooks were in order, to strategic long-term planning, things like how, again, do you get more efficiency out of the work team that you have? How can you have a bigger impact? How can you now not just work on things for North America, but also work on things for South America? So again, it's about moving from the day-to-day to strategic, and it often comes with an increased size of your group that's working for you, but also an increased scope of impact. So now, again, like I mentioned, you may have started out working on just for things on the East Coast. You end up in all of the U.S., and then ultimately you may be responsible for teams that work internationally. So that's the progression that you typically see on the management side. And that's my grandson down there, sitting at my desk. All right, so just a quick note on some of the different disciplines that we hire in the cosmetics industry, which may come as a surprise to some people, but we hire people with polymer chemistry backgrounds, physical organic chemistry, material science, chemical engineering, different forms of biology, even behavioral scientists as we look to understand consumers and why they do what they do, why they buy what they buy, why they use it the way they use it, and even bioengineering backgrounds. And this isn't an exhaustive list, but just to give you an idea. And again, the point here is that you really need to do some homework on the different industries before you write them off and say, well, as I almost did with this industry, and say, well, there can't be much science going on there, and then move on to something else. It's important that you spend a little time doing the homework. And then just to wrap things up, this is kind of a typical R&D process in various industries. Obviously, you have to discover some technology. And in our industry, because these are products that are used on people, we have to make sure, obviously, that it's safe and that it works the way we say it's going to work. And then you do some type of technology protections, typically in terms of patents or patent disclosure. And then you have to then put it in some type of formulation, because typically when we discover a technology, it's usually just to prove whether or not there's an opportunity for it to work. And sometimes we find good things, but we can't figure out a way to put it in a formula and that it still does what it's supposed to do. So the next step is to make sure that it's efficacious in a formula once the formula is established. Once you put that whole thing together, you have to go and check whether or not this combination of the technology and formulation is covered by any patents, or if there's any regulatory things that may be blocking you from bringing it to market. And once that's cleared, you can file some additional patents to protect the technology in the formulation. And then the labs typically will meet with marketing and say, hey, we've come up with this great thing, and then the marketing teams have to figure out, okay, is it something they think the consumers will be interested in? Is it something that they think they'd be able to be successful selling? And at the same time, we kind of confirm that the formulation itself is stable. We establish different types of claims, and again go back to do safety, regulatory compliance checks, and then the formulations are scaled up prior to launch to make sure that it will be able to be produced in our plants. And so this is all of the different areas where the analytical team has a role to play in terms of doing different types of testing to support these operations. These are the areas where the microbiology team also play a role in making sure that the products are well preserved and that technologies are good for use. And then finally, the pilot lab, or the demi-grand, which they call it here in the DG, is responsible for making batches for them to help develop claims, but also to check to see that they can be scaled up. So even though I'm in charge of 3 departments, they do have multiple areas along the R&D process where they are active. Okay, so that concludes the presentation for today. Feel free to ask any questions that you may have. And I believe the idea is that you will type them in the chat box. Okay, I think I see. Let's see. I see one question says, how can you reflect the dual experience on a resume? I'm not sure exactly what the dual experience they're talking about. So if somebody can tell me specifically what the dual experiences they're talking about, I'll move on to the next question. When is the best time to start looking for internships? So for us, and actually for most companies, the internships typically start in May, and the recruitment starts in January. So I would start as early as possible to start looking for internships, and a lot of times companies will post their internship information on their websites. So if you take a look at the websites, but again, also take the opportunity to meet with the companies when they come to your school, whether it's just to the department or if it's a career fair, because that's ultimately probably the best way, as opposed to sending your resume in through a website, actually handing it to somebody who's going to be responsible for part of the process of selecting the interns. Okay. How do you determine the level of job you should apply for after completing a postdoc? So basically, you can look at the job description, and actually I think I had a couple of examples. Yeah, so here's an example I pulled off of the internet yesterday, and what you'll see in the qualifications sections, it will say BS or BA in chemistry or related science required, 3 to 5 years of experience, and cosmetic formulation needed. So when you see something like this, what it indicates is that they are okay with somebody with a BS in chemistry, but they want them to have 3 to 5 years experience. Often what most companies do is they consider the fact that you did a PhD and or a postdoc to equal some years of experience, even though it might not be specifically in formulation. So again, I think when you're looking at the specific job postings, you need to look to see if it says PhD, BS, or how many years of experience. And at the end of the day, you have to try to match your skills or your desires to what it says that you're going to be doing. So basically, in reading this job description, it looks like they're looking for somebody to do some formulation, but there's a whole list of other things that are associated with this specific position. So what that means to me, if I was reading is that it's not going to be 100% formulation. So therefore, it may be okay for you not to have a strong background in formulation. So again, you have to look for some keywords, and you have to look really at what the responsibilities are to see if it's something you're interested in. So even if it's something you're interested in, but it doesn't look like the qualifications meet what you're interested in, the qualifications don't match what your education is what I meant to say. It may still be worth applying for the position, because sometimes, and this happens to me quite often, the resumes come in and they'll be forwarded to me, even though the person didn't apply for the position that I have open. The talent recruitment or the HR team sees the resume and says, hey, this looks interesting for Harold, let's send it to him. So I don't think it's a lost cause. Okay. How many college students do you let intern? We generally, here at L'Oreal, we've had as high as 25. Last year, the program was down to, I think, 14. So somewhere around there, somewhere between a dozen to 2 dozen is typically what we handle. If you have completed a PhD but did not complete an internship during your PhD, how might you go about trying to get an internship? So if you've already completed the PhD, there's probably not a need for you to do an internship, because at this point, because again, most companies are looking at doing one of two things with their internship program. They're looking to mentor the students to give them an exposure to industry, or they're looking to hire people right away when they're done. So I would imagine that at your point, if you've completed your PhD, there's probably not a big need for you to do an internship. There may be an opportunity for you to do a co-op program. Some companies allow people or students to come work for a longer period of time, say 6 months to a year, what they call a co-op program. But again, that's usually associated with people who are still in school. Would you plan to apply to follow up previous questions? Would you plan to apply to a specific position? Yeah, again, I think that in general, if you see job postings like this one, or I think I've attached a couple of other ones. So yeah, this is a process engineer. What you want to try to apply to positions that most closely fit either what you're interested in doing or your educational background, or in the best world, both what you want to do and matching your educational background. That's kind of the best way to proceed. If you're interested in a specific company, but they don't have anything that directly matches your background, in that case, it may be advantageous to apply anyway, because either they'll keep your resume on file, or sometimes for strong candidates, they bring them in. We have a rotation program where we bring people in without the very clear idea of where they're going to end up, and we let them try a couple of different things and see what they like the best, and then we slot them in a position that either best suits their skill set or something that they seem to be very interested in doing. Let's see. How do you reposition yourself within an organization if you have gone down one career path and become dissatisfied? Do organizations frown upon shifting career paths? So I think you should always keep your options open. Again, I think the further up you go on either side of the career path, the more difficult it becomes to come back to the other side. I think earlier in your career, there's a lot more flexibility in terms of bouncing back and forth to really hone in on what you like to do. I will say this, that pursuing the management track, the one thing you need to understand is that typically in organizations, the management track is much more restrictive. And the reason I say that is that if there's not if one manager doesn't leave, you can't just create another manager position and split the group in two. So typically, as far as career progression, if you're interested in management, you can still progress on the technical ladder, but make sure that you take whatever training's necessary. Maybe you have some interns that you manage in the summertime, but kind of get your feet wet as you can in the management side of things while you continue to build the technical side of your career until the opening comes available. Otherwise, what happens if you're on the management track early in your career and there are no openings that come up above you, there's really nowhere that the company can put you because there are no openings. So you have to keep that in mind also. This was asked earlier. So showing up and talking to people is really the most important. I think that is probably the most important thing that you can do now. We do, our talent recruitment team does actually do a lot of work on the internet now, looking for people through LinkedIn and things like, and actually reaching out to people who may not have seen the job posting. So I think it's important, one, to have a good, clean presence on the internet with up-to-date information that shows you in the best light, not just as a social being, but as a potential scientist and a good employee. But there's nothing better than coming to either a career fair or one of these meetings at the college campuses and actually talking to somebody, because they can see your passion, and at the same time, you can see the passion of the people who are there to represent the company. So I think that's extremely important. I think I got, see, it looks like somebody's typing another question here. Okay, what are the best questions to ask while networking to uncover the hidden gems within an organization? That's a good question. I think first and foremost, you have to try to talk to the scientist. And when you talk to the scientist, you can ask them things like, what surprised you the most when you started working at the company, or what's the most exciting thing that you've done while you've been there? What advice would you give somebody on their first day if they were first starting at the company? And that allows you to get some, those are open-ended questions that allows them to speak to individually what it is that they find interesting about the company, the things that surprise them, and kind of what would their warning be for people just starting out. So those types of open-end questions that allow the scientists to speak to their experience, I think, are very good questions. And even if the scientists, I'm just thinking, because sometimes I know the talent recruitment teams go out to these, they always try to take some scientists, but I'd imagine with the amount of events they go to, they may show up sometimes without scientists. So don't be afraid to talk to them, but you should always ask them if they could have one of the scientists call you, or if you could call one of the scientists, because I think that's the most important thing, is to talk to somebody who's actually doing what you're thinking about doing. What kind of weight do you put on a resume? I mean, stylistically. Okay, so I think resumes, at least for me, and I'm kind of old school, but for me, resumes are still very important. I typically read people's resumes as they come in, and yes, I do look for spelling errors, and I know sometimes, because particularly the resumes that are submitted through the internet portal, sometimes the formatting gets messed up. So that I understand. But if I get a Word document resume and there's spelling errors and capitalization and mismatched fonts, and that to me speaks to, basically it tells me how serious the person is about really looking for a position. And in fact, from a talent recruitment standpoint, we once at a university whose name I will not mention, we received a book of resumes. So we went to a career fair, and the university handed us, here's a book of resumes of our top students that we went, and we went through the book, and there were so many errors in so many resumes that it caused us to question, should we even be recruiting at this school? So I think it's still very important to make sure that your resume is very polished. Now, I don't know if you want to have it professionally done, because it's easy to tell when they're professionally done also. But I think you want to make sure that it's polished, have a couple of people review it, because it is still important. Any other questions? Okay, that looks like that's it. So I'd like to thank everybody for listening, and I hope you got some good, helpful information out of this.